Hi guys, I'm Danae Brazil and today we will be doing driver ratings for the Barcelona-Catalunya Grand Prix. And this was certainly an interesting one. I think this was a very strategy heavy race. So I do think that made rating the driving a little more difficult because sometimes the teams just make poor choices and the drivers are stuck with them. But before I get into this week's driver ratings, I am going to make a change to last week's from Monaco after some feedback from you guys about why I rated Liam Lawson an 8. And I do have to agree that after a day or so post-race, I was kind of feeling like maybe a 9.5 was probably more fair. I will say I am only filming driver ratings a few hours after the race ended. Currently it is 10:47 a.m. for me and the race ended at 2:30 in the morning. So I don't have a lot of time to put thoughts together, but this is the easiest time for me to film this. So sometimes I find out information after I've already filmed and it just is what it is. Again, these aren't serious ratings. It's not as though I'm qualified to speak about this at all. I just want to. So with that all out of the way, let's get into this week's ratings, starting with Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso, who I'm giving a 5 out of 10. Really just unfortunate weekend all around for Fernando, especially considering that this is his home race. Just the car is bad. He qualified behind Lance Stroll, which is unfortunate, and that will be reflected probably more in Lance's rating than Fernando's. But just overall really a nothing race, and then a DNF because of mechanical issues once again for Aston Martin. And sorry, this piece of hair is bugging me. But yeah, aside from that, I really don't have much to say about it. It was pretty anonymous and pretty much a waste of time Fernando getting in the car, if we're honest. Next up is Lance Stroll, who I'm going to give a 5.5 out of 10. Again, another mechanical DNF for Aston Martin, but he did qualify ahead of Fernando, so he gets an extra half a point. Other than that, I have literally nothing to say, so we'll move on. Next up is Cadillac, and we're going to start with Valtteri Bottas, who I am giving a 5 out of 10. Again, another mechanical DNF for Cadillac, and also he qualified behind Perez. Again, he's off Perez's pace. It's just comparatively, it's not looking good for Valtteri. Every weekend now he's behind Sergio, and it's just becoming a little too consistent for my liking. And then next up we have Sergio Perez, who I'm giving a 6 out of 10. He qualified ahead of his teammate and he managed to finish the race, which is a positive. He was the last of the finishing cars on the road, so really not great. I think saying he finished 14th really makes this look more positive than it was. There were just a lot of DNFs, but yeah, it wasn't horrific. That car is obviously very limiting, so it is a 6 out of 10 for Sergio Perez. Then next up we have the Williams drivers, and we're going to start with Carlos Sainz, who I'm going to give a 6.5 out of 10. I don't think this was a horrific weekend for Carlos considering the state of the car. He qualified 2 places ahead of his teammate, which is good, and he finished 12th, so he wasn't quite last of the finishers. I mean, it wasn't great either, but honestly, I'm looking at that, maybe this is a 6. Because, actually, no, we're giving Sainz a 6. I'm giving him a full, saying he's that much better than Perez, not really, I don't know. I guess, no. God, I'm all over the place. I'm going to stick with the 6.5 for Sainz solely because he's still a full lap ahead of Perez. And I just can't give them the same score if they are on completely different laps of the race. I think that's ridiculous. But yeah, other than that, it wasn't great. Yeah, I really got very little to say about this one. Maybe I'm rethinking Sergio Perez's rating. Okay, no, fuck it. Ignore all of what I've just said. We're going to go back to Sergio Perez. Sergio Perez is getting a 5.5, and therefore Carlos Sainz is getting a 6 out of 10. There we go. I'm sure I'm going to have a really good time editing this segment where all I've done is ramble on. But, yeah. Perez gets a 5.5 because he did better than Bottas. Sainz gets a 6 out of 10 because he did better than Perez, essentially. And he was better than his teammate in his car that sucked. Next up we have Alex Albon, who I'm going to give a 5.5 out of 10. He qualified behind Carlos, which isn't great. And then I don't know what was going on during the race for Alex Albon. I don't understand what strategy either Williams driver was on, to be honest, because even Sainz was getting pitted at weird times, I felt like. And then, like at one point, I think Albon was in the pits. I thought he was retiring, but then he came back out. So I have absolutely no clue what happened to Alex Albon in this race. So very difficult to rate, but ultimately he was behind his teammate, so it's a 5.5. Next up we have Alpine. I'm going to start with Franco Colapinto, who I'm going to give a 7 out of 10. I think this was a good weekend from Franco considering the car. He qualified ahead of his teammate, which I think is very well done, and he finished in the points. So I think that is a job well done. I'm also curious as to why the team swapped him and Pierre, because I do think that changed kind of who between them was going to be their big point scorer, and yeah, he didn't sound too happy about that, and I do think it was a little unfair, so it's a 7 for Franco. And then speaking of Pierre Gasly, I'm going to also give him a 7 out of 10, because despite the fact that he finished ahead of Franco, I do think the team orders had something to do with that. I also have to acknowledge that he qualified behind his teammate, so I do think it kind of balances out. I think Gasly and Colapinto were pretty even this weekend across the board, even if I don't think the finishing positions really show how on par they were with one another. Next up we have the Audis, and we're going to start with Nico Hülkenberg, who I am giving an 8 out of 10, because he was putting together a really good race. It was a good qualifying, followed by really good race pace, and unfortunately he DNF'd because of having the worst possible luck, which is that he was behind Liam Lawson, and Liam kicked up some gravel, and one single piece of gravel happened to hit just the right point on the car that triggered the engine kill switch. Genuinely baffling how that happened. Super unfortunate for Nico, who was on for his first points of the season. Yeah, I still think it was a really good drive on his part though, so it's still an 8 out of 10. Next up we have Gabriel Bortoleto, who I'm giving a 6.5 out of 10, because he qualified way behind his teammate, and then in the race was also not on for points, and even after all the DNFs still didn't score any. So just nowhere near where he needed to be, certainly nowhere near Hülkenberg. So for that reason it's a 6.5 for Gabby. Next up we have the V-Carbs. We're going to start with Liam Lawson, who I'm giving an 8 out of 10 again this week. Like I said in the intro, I upped last week's to a 9.5. Okay, everyone can calm down now. But I do think this was another super solid drive from Liam. I think qualifying 8th was very good. I think that was a really good quali from him. Obviously did benefit a little from Charles Leclerc's problems, but we will get to that. And again, the race, good pace, didn't do anything stupid, and took home good points again. I think this has just been a very good, tidy season for Liam so far, and this is just another example of it. Next up we have Arvid Lindblad, who I'm giving a 7 out of 10. Pretty similar to Liam, got unfortunate in qualifying with something happened with his car, I believe, so he qualified outside of the top 10, and then in the race moved up into the points, only one position behind his teammate. I think it's a good drive from Arvid, maximised I think what he could, and I think overall, yeah, did a good job. I'm even tempted, I think, to raise this to a 7.5 now that I'm looking at it closer. So, yeah, I think this was a good weekend for Arvid though, which I'm glad to see. Next up we have Haas, and we're going to start with Esteban Ocon, who is getting a 5.5 out of 10. This was a rough weekend for Haas once again. It feels like since they brought their upgrades, they have had a terrible time every weekend, and this was no exception. Ocon qualified behind his teammate and then finished 13th. The only person he finished ahead of was Perez on the road, so really not a good sign at all for Esteban. So I think a 5.5 might even be a little generous, if I'm honest. And then next up we have Ollie Behrman, who I'm giving a 6 out of 10. He qualified ahead of his teammate, but then got unlucky with a DNF towards the end of the race due to mechanical problems. But he was significantly better in the race than Esteban as well, so that's why I'm giving him the extra half a point. And probably if he'd finished it, it would have been easier to give him something higher. But overall, I think he did a decent job. It's really hard to tell with the Haas right now because I do think the car is bad, but it's a bit of a difficult one to grade for Behrman, I think. Next up we have Red Bull. I'm going to start with Isaac Hadjar, who I'm giving a 7.5 out of 10. I think he did the best he could with this one, but difficult to give him higher considering where I've rated Max, and he ultimately did qualify behind and finish behind Max, but I still think it was very well driven. There's a world in which I do boost this to an 8. I'll see how I'm feeling about it when I'm editing, but overall I think he did a good job. Unfortunate on the start. Again, it feels like the Red Bull car picks and chooses which of the two drivers is going to have a good start and which is going to have a bad start. It feels like we can never have both Red Bull cars have a good launch. There's clearly something wrong there, and that was very unfortunate for Hadjar. But we did see him make a lot of great moves to regain all of those places, so I think it was a good race from him despite the early problems. And then next up we have Max Verstappen, who I'm giving an 8 out of 10. Now I will say if I end up raising Hadjar to an 8, then Max will get boosted to an 8.5 because he ultimately was better than his teammate this weekend. Qualified 5th, which I actually think is better than I was expecting considering the state of the car in practice, and also that I think the Red Bull is the 4th best car. So automatically I'm thinking 7th is like kind of where that car should be. So I think posting it in 5th, obviously capitalising on Charles Leclerc not putting in a lap, but also being ahead of Oscar Piastri and being ahead of his teammate are all good things. And I think it was a good qualifying considering the state of the Red Bull. And in the race, it was a very lonely, boring race for Max. Essentially, it was just about getting that car to the end, which, considering the steering and all of the other various problems with it, I actually think is far greater of a feat than we're acknowledging. And then, yeah, benefited from problems up ahead and boosted to 4th. So I think it's a good race for Max considering what he has to work with. Then next up we have McLaren, starting with Oscar Piastri, who I'm giving a 6.5 out of 10 right now. Again, I might drop this to a 6 in editing. I'm pretty unimpressed with what Oscar brought to the table this weekend. Super anonymous race from him, feel like I barely saw him, and I don't think he should have finished behind the Red Bulls. Qualified behind the Red Bulls, which I don't think is good enough, especially considering his teammate is up in 4th. I think Oscar should have been way closer to Lando. And then to also finish the race behind Max, considering again the state of that car, I don't think it was good enough from Oscar at all this weekend. He was nowhere near Lando really at any point at all. It just wasn't great from Oscar. A very anonymous weekend, and I do think we should start being a little concerned about the gap between him and Lando. Now speaking of Lando Norris, I'm going to be giving him an 8.5 out of 10. Actually, I'm tempted to boost this to 9. As you can tell, I really have not locked in my ratings in my head this morning, despite writing them out. But it's going to be an 8.5 or a 9 for Lando, depending on how I feel editing this. And really, it will depend on if I change the ratings for the Red Bulls. But overall, I think this was a really good drive from Lando. I kind of think this is the best he could have done. I think qualifying 4th is well done. I mean, he could have maybe... There's a world in which he could be in the top 3, but I'm not too mad at like a 4th place qualifying. And then, yeah, benefited from things up ahead in the race. His race pace was pretty good. I think the McLaren just isn't quite fast enough to challenge those top 3 this weekend. But I do think Lando, at the very least, was close to the Mercedes when they were fighting. He was in with a shot, and I do think he was ultimately rewarded for that, even if that reward is due to Kimi Antonelli's misfortune. Next up we have Ferrari. I'm going to start with Lewis Hamilton, who I am giving a 10 out of 10. This was very good from Lewis. I think qualifying on the front row, splitting the Mercedes was very well done. And then in the race, he was just untouchable. This was a vintage Lewis Hamilton drive. I'm very happy to see it. He was incredible on pace. I think the team strategy paid off. And I think even without the virtual safety car, he still would have won this race. I think everything just came together really well this weekend, and his form was incredible all throughout, especially considering this wasn't a track I thought the Ferrari would be very good at coming in, but he really got the absolute most out of it. And I'm so happy he finally got his first win for Ferrari. Next up we have Charles Leclerc. A very different vibe from this side of things. I have a 5 written down here, but I think that's just me being a Leclerc fan. I think this has to be a 4.5 for Charles Leclerc. He crashed the car in qualifying on a banker lap. The fact he didn't even have... This was his first lap in Q3 that he crashed it on, I think is ridiculous and was completely his fault. And then in the race, the pace was decent. You know, he was doing okay. He'd made up some places, gotten towards the back of Max, which I think is good. I think the fact he got past Oscar was very good, although that might just be more because Oscar had no pace. It's hard for me to kind of weigh up whether that was good from Charles or bad from Oscar. But yeah, just then unfortunate with the DNF. Maybe that's why I've put a 5 here. Again, we're just going to see in editing how I feel, to be honest. But it just wasn't a great weekend for Charles Leclerc. Obviously unlucky in the end, but the qualifying crash, the fact that this was another crash from Charles Leclerc when the number of crashes we've had from him now this season is getting a little ridiculous. You know, even just recently, it's like he crashed in Miami, then he nearly crashed behind the safety car in Canada. He got so lucky he didn't. Then he crashed twice in Monaco, and he's crashed again in qualifying here in Barcelona. It is just a very messy season for Charles, and I think it's even being exacerbated when we look at the other side of the garage, and Lewis Hamilton has just won his first race for the team. And then finally we have Mercedes, starting with Kimi Antonelli, who I'm going to give an 8 out of 10. I think this was still a good drive from Kimi. Again, very unlucky to have the mechanical DNF right after he passed George. That's very unfortunate. You know, I think he outdrove his teammate this weekend. I think it was a good drive. I think his pace was good. Qualifying was, I think, the big disappointment for him to not be on the front row for the first time this season. But yeah, I don't think it was a disaster for Kimi in terms of driving. I think he still has a lot of positives to take away on that side of things. But yeah, the mechanical failure, I had referred to this as being a ticking time bomb for Kimi anyway, considering the amount of DNFs we've had for all of the Mercedes powered cars. And yeah, that bomb went off today, and this is where he's been left. Unfortunately, there's a big point swing for him as well, but I do think he still drove very well considering. And finally, now for George Russell, I'm going to be giving him a 7.5 out of 10. I think it was a really good qualifying from George, and I think it was super well driven. But in the race, his pace just wasn't there compared to, certainly not Hamilton, but even I think next to Antonelli, his race pace wasn't great. I still think it's an okay drive from George. It's hard to tell because I do think the Mercedes car is quite flattering to its drivers, but I also think some of the defending on Kimi was a little ridiculous, particularly when he really squeezed him down the main straight towards turn 1. I thought that wasn't the greatest defending from George, and ultimately that kind of opened him up for the move from Kimi. But yeah, my main criticism is just race pace. I really think he needs to be better on pace, and I think this is starting to become a consistent issue for George, is that Kimi is just significantly faster than him in the car. But yeah, that is all I have to say about the drivers this week. I'm glad to have a week off F1, to be honest. It's been a pretty full-on couple of Grand Prix, but I feel like we're finally really in the swing and there's championship momentum now, which is nice. But yeah, clearly a race where like my ratings are very subject to change. I think it being a race that's heavier on strategy, even though I really do enjoy watching those kind of races, does make it harder to rate the driver's skills specifically, because the strategy can really help or hinder them, and that is ultimately up to the team. But overall, I'm feeling pretty good about this one, considering Max Verstappen actually finished the race and Lewis Hamilton finally won for Ferrari. I think we're all very happy about that one. But yeah, that is all. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see even more from me, please subscribe. And if you'd like to see even more from me, you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Letterboxd. All those things are linked down below. And in those places you can see my makeup and special effects work, as well as my movie commentary and all those things, which you can also find on this channel. But yeah, that will be all for this week, and I will see you in a couple of weeks from now to talk about the Austrian Grand Prix. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.